My House of Horrors Chapter 441 to 450. Looking at the few pictures on the wall, Chen Ge had an indescribable feeling. He subconsciously walked into the room and stopped before the pictures. The truth that he had been searching for was right before his eyes, but at that moment, Chen Ge felt lost. So, it really is you. He stared at the wedding picture silently, looking at the young Dr. Gao. The man in the picture had a blissful smile on his face, and it was a smile that Chen Ge had not seen on Dr. Gao's face before. Is it because the burden on my shoulders is too heavy? Hundreds of human lives wrapped around Dr. Gao like an impenetrable net, and they were like needles stabbing into his soul, making it hard for him to breathe. 3 people eventually became one person. Is that why the Society of Strange Tales loves the number 3 so much? Many clues connected in his mind, but Chen Ge did not think about that. Once he thought about Dr. Gao, the first thing that appeared in his mind was the small incident that happened at the Pen Spirit's friend's home. At the home of the girl with severe depression, Dr. Gao had once said, "You haven't walked the path that they have, so you won't know how difficult it is. The fact that they are able to survive it is a kind of strength." Now that he thought about it, it felt more like Dr. Gao had said it to him. As the best psychologist in Zhujiang, he knew that he was also sick. However, he chose a different method of treatment. Instead of compromising, he used the most violent method to resist. Walking to the bed, Chen Ge opened the bedside table. It was filled with various syringes and pills of unknown use. Many of the packages said that they should be used under a doctor's guidance, and overdosing could be life-threatening. The packaging has already been torn open. This place is filled with dead bodies, and the only living person is Dr. Gao himself. He probably prepared these pills for himself. When Xiao Xiao's grandfather was dying, Dr. Gao had been there. At the time, he had said that he wanted to end things once and for all. Sitting on the double bed, Chen Ge's hands were clasped together as he carefully recalled everything related to Dr. Gao. That day, in the ward, after Dr. Gao said that his wife was in a car accident, he added that he loved his wife very much. Then, Chen Ge stood up and looked at the door of the room. Then, Dr. Gao pushed open the door and walked out. The white cat lingered outside the door, refusing to enter the room. The thing that had been attracting it seemed to be at the junction between the 2 rooms, and there was only a very normal wooden door between the 2 rooms. Could Dr. Gao have pushed open the blood door when he was about to die? This room that was built at the deepest part of the underground morgue was filled with many medical devices and strange things. Dr. Gao appeared to have thought about reviving the dead. Unfortunately, he failed. Disheartened, he was ready to end everything once and for all, but then something happened that made him change his mind. Standing at the deepest part of despair, there is a high chance that he has pushed open the door that leads to the Red World. Chen Ge looked at the wedding picture. The woman in the picture had appeared in Ma Yin's video, but in the picture, she was very mature and had a unique presence about her. A person who has been dead for a long time has reappeared. This can only be achieved by using the things behind the door. Chen Ge understood what was attracting the white cat. The blood vessels that it had consumed came from the world behind the door, and it was those things that were attracting the white cat. Midnight is the time when the blood door appears, and the Black Phone's mission requirement is for me to enter the central hub of the underground morgue before midnight. Could the real mission venue be on the other side of the door? Just the underground morgue on the other side of the door gave Chen Ge pressure, much less the blood world behind the door. The countless monsters gave him a headache just thinking about them. The world behind the door is much more dangerous than the world outside the door. Since the Black Phone didn't specifically ask me to enter the door, I might as well stay in this room until the sun rises. The mission completion rate would not be high that way, but compared to solving the mystery and finding the truth, Chen Ge felt like it was better to be more cautious. He sat down at the table and flipped through the notes on the table. He took out his phone and took pictures of all the important things. The Society of Strange Tales had created many ghost stories, and he had memorized these scare points. There was a table full of notes and information, which was a special treasure to him. If I can restore all these ghost stories, it will greatly enrich my haunted house and lay the foundation for a thriller-themed theme park in the future. Chen Ge sat at the table and took pictures seriously. He was studying hard. Time ticked by, and the white cat at the door started to moan anxiously. It paced back and forth between the two rooms like the thing it had been waiting for was about to appear. At 11:55 p.m., the table shook. There were still 5 minutes until midnight, but the central hub had started to change. The walls shook, and blood vessels leaked out from the cracks. Li Shu and Ma Wei, who had been waiting outside the door, rushed in. They did not dare speak loudly, so they ran to Chen Ge to report to him. Brother, something's not right. The moss outside is starting to leak blood. You need to go take a look. Quote. Leaking blood. Chen Ge calculated the time and followed the two out of the room. The moss that grew on the roof, floor, and walls started to peel off, and blood-red liquid leaked out from underneath the moss. The scariest thing was yet to come. As time moved on, after the moss peeled off, it revealed the corpses that were folded inside. The faces of the victims were revealed one by one. The room that was piled up with corpses finally revealed its true face when midnight arrived. Li Shu and Ma Wei were scared out of their wits. They did not expect that behind the thick moss was a wall made from dead bodies. Their mouths fell open, and they could not speak. Cold air rushed into their throats, and their mouths froze. The two of you, move back. With yin-yang vision and ghost ear, Chen Ge's senses were very sensitive. While Li Shu and Ma Wei were still in shock, he had already noticed that something was wrong. There were things coming from the other side of the corridor, and there were many of them. They shouldn't have come from the hidden tunnel. The walls, the ground, everything was covered with dead bodies. Blood-red liquid leaked out from their bodies, and Chen Ge could clearly see the blood vessels wriggling inside the dead bodies like poisonous snakes, holding them together. Midnight was approaching, and more blood vessels leaked out from the dead bodies. The number had reached a ridiculous level. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Brother, what should we do now? Li Shu and Ma Wei had not experienced something like this before. It was already a miracle that they did not faint on the spot. There were only 2 minutes left until midnight. The blood vessels were mixed in the red liquid, and it was impossible to tell them apart. The worst thing was yet to come. The blood vessels were used to fix the dead bodies on the wall. When the blood vessels left the dead bodies, the whole underground morgue started to shake like there was an earthquake. Come in and hide inside the room. Chen Ge pulled Li Shu and Ma Wei into the room. He held the door handle and stood alone at the door. Midnight was approaching, and the corridor outside felt different from before. The dead bodies that were piled up inside the wall seemed to have lost some kind of restraint. The arms dangled from the ceiling, and they swayed with the scene in midair. It was chilling to look at. No one would be able to handle this at the haunted house. When Chen Ge moved his gaze, eyes started to open in the gaps between the limbs and the broken bodies. The dead have opened their eyes. The eyes in the pile of dead bodies were different from a normal person's. They had no pupils, or rather, the pupils had melted together with the white of the eyes. There was only a layer of yellowish brown, and it was very scary. Thankfully, Chen Ge had a higher tolerance. At a time like this, he was still able to look at the eyes in the pile of dead bodies calmly. However, what happened next caused Chen Ge to lose his cool. In the direction that he was looking, more and more eyes opened. These were the victims of the Society of Strange Tales, and they had now become part of the ghost story. The faces on the wall had woken up from their slumber. Their faces were twisted, and their bodies were twisted. They struggled to turn their necks to look at Chen Ge. This scene was hard to describe. Countless twisted arms and elongated necks reached out from the corridor. The twisted heads opened their mouths, and they tried to lean toward Chen Ge. It was too scary. Chen Ge's back was drenched in sweat. The only reason he was able to maintain his composure was because he had been completing the missions given by the Black Phone for the past 2 months, and that had given him a lot of courage. If he saw this a few months ago, he would have been scared out of his wits. This is a complete 3-star scenario. His body involuntarily took a step back. Chen Ge gripped the hammer tightly, and he felt a sense of security. When there was only 1 minute left until midnight, the whole corridor seemed to come alive. All the dead bodies had woken up. The walls collapsed, and the bodies crawled out. Bodies kept falling from the ceiling. They maintained their dying appearance. Their bodies were pierced through by the red lines, and most of their limbs were still connected. Chen Ge now understood how scary the Society of Strange Tales' lair was, and he had a new understanding about Dr. Gao. To be the chairperson of the Society of Strange Tales and to be able to come up with a cure for so many mental patients and murderers, Dr. Gao was the scariest person. During the day, he was the best psychologist in all of Zhejiang. He cared for his patients, and there was not a single flaw in him. But at night, he stayed with countless corpses, using the bodies of the victims to build an underground laboratory. These were two completely opposite lives, but they were so perfectly combined. The scariest thing was, he had lived like this for 5 years, and in those 5 years, no one had ever doubted his existence. How did he do this? The bodies rushed at him, and there was no way out. Chen Ge could only retreat into the room and lock the door from the inside. Come with me. Don't ask me anything. Just do whatever I tell you to do. The bodies seemed to be afraid of this door. They did not dare get too close, but the bodies behind them would push forward. Eventually, the faces stuck to the gap of the door. Don't just stand there. Come with me. Quote. The steel door creaked noisily, and Chen Ge had no idea how long the door could hold on. He returned to the innermost room. Staring at the time on his phone, he stood before the door silently. Midnight finally arrived. Blood bloomed like a rose in the middle of the wooden door. The blood with the heavy scent of blood leaked out from the door, and soon, the whole door was painted red. Li Ju and Ma Wei had not seen something like this before. Everything that had happened that night had given them a huge shock. Their minds were in a state of confusion, and the only thing they knew was to follow Chen Ge. Everything I'm going to say next is very important, so listen carefully. Now you have two choices, follow me through the door, or stay here and wait for death. Chen Ge's tone was severe. He placed the white cat on his backpack and used the hammer to push the blood door open. The heavy scent of blood rushed out like a wave. Li Shu and Ma Wei could not take it anymore. Their faces were pale, but they still followed closely behind Chen Ge, using their actions to answer. Since you're willing to take this risk with me, I'll give you one more piece of advice. Chen Ge pointed at the half-open door. Based on my understanding of the blood door, if no one pushes it, it will disappear on its own after 1 minute, and it will only open again after 24 hours. You'd better be prepared. Chen Ge had the experience of entering the world behind the door, so he knew that only the door pusher could control a door. The door pusher at Coffin Village was the well woman, and the door pusher at Third Sick Hall was Meng Nan's main persona. Neither of them meant him any harm, so after the mission was over, they opened the door to let him out. However, this trial mission was different. He had a grudge against the chairperson of the Society of Strange Tales. The society had been destroyed by Chen Ge, and the chairperson was the only one left. After Chen Ge entered the door, no matter what the result of the battle was, the other party would not open the door to let him go. Therefore, this time, Chen Ge had to wait until midnight before he could leave. If it's just a refuge, there shouldn't be too much of a problem. Even though the world behind the door is scary, the door pusher, Dr. Gao, is not in Zhejiang. This is like the Third Sick Hall without Meng Nan's main persona, the danger will be much lower. While Chen Ge was thinking, the steel door collapsed. Blood flowed on the ground, and countless bodies crawled in. Without wasting any time, Chen Ge led Li Shu and Ma Wei through the door. Every time I do a trial mission, I'll be fully prepared, but even so, there are still many accidents. Chen Ge looked at the bodies outside, and his eyes were complicated. Bodies controlled by blood vessels were different from specters. Even if he summoned all the specters he could use, they would not be of much use. I'm afraid that's why Dr. Gao spent so much effort to build all this. Chen Ge saw the limitation of specters, but he soon recovered. Specters are indeed not that useful to these bodies, but it might be different for red specters. If I have enough red specters, these bodies won't be a problem at all. Quote. Chen Ge was never blindly confident, and he would not admit defeat easily. In this trial mission, he set a new goal for himself. Before the group of bodies arrived, Chen Ge closed the blood door. The moment the door closed, the blood fog stuck to Chen Ge's body, forming a thin layer of blood membrane. The world behind this door is different from the Third Sick Hall and Coffin Village. Chen Ge reached out to touch the layer of blood membrane on his skin. He felt like his whole body was wrapped up, and it was difficult to breathe. It was very uncomfortable. When I was at Coffin Village and the third sick hall, I've never encountered a blood fog on my body before. He felt strangely unsettled. He took out the comic and realized that there was also a thin layer of blood membrane on the comic. Walking to the corner, Chen Ge called for Yan Danian and Lao Zhou softly, but there was no reply. Chen Ge opened his backpack and pressed the button on the recorder, but no matter how hard he pressed, the recorder would not work. He could not even hear the static. The blood membrane can block the connection between me and the ghosts. Chen Ge gripped the hammer, but he did not act rashly. I once saw the woman in the well control the blood fog behind the door at Coffin Village, and Meng Nan's body merged with the blood fog at the third sick hall. This proves that the door pusher can control the blood fog. Chen Ge thought, I was surrounded by the blood membrane when I entered the door. Was this a setup left behind by Dr. Gao before he left, or did he not leave Zhujiang but used a special ghost to trick the police? Is he hiding behind the door and silently controlling the blood fog behind the door? Dr. Gao was the opponent that Chen Ge did not want to face the most, and that was true in many ways. The longer I stay inside the blood fog, the thicker the membrane becomes. This is going to be tricky. Without the ghosts, Chen Ge could only rely on the hammer and the white cat that had consumed the blood vessels. The situation was not in his favor. Panicking, Chen Ge squatted down and turned to look at his shadow. He reached out to touch it, and there was no blood membrane on it. She's still here. Chen Ge felt much more at ease. He tried to call out Zhang Ya's name in his heart, and he could vaguely hear someone talking. However, the distance between the two seemed to be very far. Even with ghost ear, he could not hear it clearly. What is this place? I'm a little out of breath. Quote. Li Shu and Ma Wei's bodies were also covered by a layer of blood film. The strange thing was that the two of them couldn't see the film. They kept touching their necks as if there was an invisible rope around their necks. Don't panic. No matter what happens, you must remain calm. After Chen Ge finished speaking, he turned the doorknob and opened the bloody door again. A minute had passed, and outside the door was an incomparably absurd and terrifying world. The road was twisted like a twisted intestine. The walls on both sides bulged outwards like the organs of a living creature, and the surface was covered with a layer of transparent blood membrane. Something that looked like blood vessels crisscrossed above his head, and there were countless blood vessels flowing within them. Looking from afar, it was as if this world itself was a deformed life form. This is the world in Dr. Gao's eyes. Just what kind of psychological change would a person have to imagine the world they lived in to be like this? What is Dr. Gao thinking about every day? The door at Coffin Village was pushed open by the well woman. In her eyes, the villagers were all deformed animals. At the time, her greatest wish was to escape and not be discovered. Therefore, when she pushed open the door, the world behind the door was unusually thick, and the visibility was limited to 1 to 2 meters. As she wished, the villagers had all turned into humanoid monsters. Similarly, in the world behind the door at the third sick hall, the patients were like zombies, and under the beds lived the broken hands that symbolized fear and the thin shadows that symbolized desire. These were Meng Nan's naive impression of the world. Various complicated emotions materialized into monsters in the child's eyes. The underground morgue was the third door that Chen Ge had entered, and the world behind this door was also the scariest and most incomprehensible to Chen Ge. The world behind the door won't lie. This is Dr. Gao's real heart. Chen Ge turned back to look. The world has become a human organ, but this room with his wife's picture hasn't changed. This should be the last piece of pure land in his heart. Gripping the hammer, Chen Ge thought about it before carefully removing the picture from the wall and placing it inside his backpack. When he pulled open the zipper, Chen Ge was surprised to find a mannequin head inside his backpack. If not for the picture, he would have forgotten about it. The mannequin head shrank at the bottom of the backpack like it was shaking. Chen Ge reached out to touch its face and then pulled it out. Strange, this thing isn't covered by the blood membrane. Is it because it was originally a prop from the underground morgue? Suddenly, a human head was pulled out from the bag. Li Ju and Ma Wei, who were already having trouble breathing, almost fainted when they saw this. They gathered their courage and walked closer. When they saw that it was a model, they sighed in relief. However, what happened next made the two of them nervous again. Chen Ge placed the mannequin head on the bed. He raised the hammer and stood across from the mannequin head. Tell me, how do I remove this blood membrane? Tell me everything you know. Quote. The room suddenly became very quiet. Other than Chen Ge, no one dared to make a sound. The mannequin head's expression seemed to change. Chen Ge's ears twitched, and he heard a very muffled plea. It's talking. Ghost ear came into effect. Chen Ge put down the hammer, placed the mannequin head next to his ear, and asked the question again. He could not tell the direction, and he had no idea where it came from. Chen Ge only heard a sobbing voice enter his ear. The voice was short, and Chen Ge had to listen to it several times before he heard it clearly. It only said one word, approval. Putting down the mannequin head, Chen Ge started to think about the meaning of the word. Does it mean that to remove the blood membrane, we have to gain the approval of the world behind the door? I am mortal enemies with the chairperson of the Society of Strange Tales. It is too difficult to gain the approval of the world behind the door. Quote. Chen Ge placed the mannequin head into his backpack and tried to take his first step out the door. When his shoes stepped on the ground, it felt like he was stepping on flesh. It was soft, slippery, and sticky. This was definitely not a good experience. If a normal person entered a tunnel like this, they would have nightmares for the rest of their lives. Don't force yourselves, but you'd better come with me. Chen Ge took his second step. Blood flowed through the thick veins on his head, and the ground shook on its own. The terrain is similar to the world outside the door, but the walls, ground, and everything that can be seen has been turned into flesh. Chen Ge took a deep breath. He placed the white cat on top of his backpack and walked down the corridor with the hammer. The wall was like a pulsating organ. Blood mist leaked out from it to envelop Chen Ge's body, and the membrane on his skin was getting thicker. The world behind the door seemed to have frozen when the door was pushed open. The structure was similar to the underground morgue at the time. The central hub was originally used to process fat and connective tissue, but due to various reasons, it had been sealed in real life. In the end, Dr. Gao had used dead bodies to build a special lab. Once you get used to it, there's nothing to be afraid of. Chen Ge said that to Li Shu and Ma Wei. The two tried for a long time, but they did not dare step out of the room. They shook their heads madly. For a normal person who has just come into contact with these things, it is indeed a bit too much. Chen Ge pointed at the room behind them. He did not force them and walked forward alone. A strange and absurd world, corridors made from flesh and blood mist drifted everywhere. This place was like a nightmare that one could not wake up from. Once one entered it, one would sink into oblivion. The lights that hung above one's head turned into the eyeballs of a living person. There was no light, and all one could see was blood red. After staying here for a long time, one would have a strange feeling like they belonged here, a part of this world. On the two sides of the corridor were doors that were covered in blood vessels. Chen Ge tried to open the doors, and there were many strange machines inside. Most of them were made from flesh and blood, and a small portion was made from normal machinery, but they were covered in flesh and blood. Such a crazy world. Walking down the corridor, at the first corner, Chen Ge saw a living person. About 5 meters away from him, there was a little girl in a white dress squatting next to the flesh. She held an attractive apple in her hand, and her eyes stared at the beating organs on the wall. It was unclear what she was thinking about. The girl before him surprised Chen Ge. Be it the spotless white dress or the flawless and innocent face, every part of the girl formed a stark contrast to the world that he was standing on. Why would a girl like this appear in a world made from flesh and blood? Chen Ge walked out from the corner and slowly approached. When the girl heard Chen Ge's footsteps, she seemed to have never thought that someone would appear here. Like a frightened deer, she turned around in a panic and accidentally dropped the apple in her hand. Chen Ge looked at the apple that had rolled to his side and picked it up. The color of the apple was alluring, but it didn't feel comfortable in his hand. It was soft and wet, and it seemed to be jumping around. Is this an apple? When Chen Ge picked up the apple, the girl was obviously nervous. She wanted to fight for it, but she was also a little afraid. Something's not right. Chen Ge placed the apple in front of the girl and took a few steps back. Seeing that Chen Ge took the initiative to step back, the girl immediately ran over and hugged the apple in her arms. Her face was only the size of a palm. Coupled with her panicked expression, she looked very cute. Don't be nervous. I mean no harm. I'm just a lost man. Chen Ge maintained his distance from the girl. In reality, he was also on his guard against the girl. After all, she was a resident of the world behind the door. The girl was still feeling quite anxious. She was like the kind of person who was playing around not far from home and was targeted by bad people. Now she was trying her best to find a way to escape. Chen Ge could see that he was very unwelcome, but he did not push her too hard. He could not use any of the monsters on him. If he pushed the girl too hard, it was hard to say who would be the bully. Taking a step back, Chen Ge put the hammer back into his backpack. I just want to ask you something. The handle of the hammer was exposed. Chen Ge purposely placed it in a convenient spot so that if he was in danger, he would be able to pull it out in 1 or 2 seconds. The girl looked at Chen Ge. She was unwilling to get close to him. She held the wall made from flesh and blood and cautiously moved away from Chen Ge. Then, she picked up her pace and ran away. Chen Ge did not chase after her. After the girl escaped, he realized with a shock that his breathing had become smoother, like the blood membrane that covered his body had thinned. I didn't seem to have done anything. I just helped the girl pick up the apple. Will helping them gain the world's approval? With so few clues, Chen Ge could not be sure. He memorized the direction that the girl had left and slowly followed her. The girl doesn't look like a dead body. Her body is agile, and her expression can change a lot. Due to the girl's appearance, Chen Ge relaxed slightly. Even though the world behind the door is scary, the people who live here have retained their humanity. I saw a trace of fear and desire in the girl's eyes. Such a complicated emotion, only humans would possess it. The world behind every door was different. Chen Ge was most worried about running into the kind of death trap that could not be solved. The monsters would bite on anyone they saw, and there was no way to communicate with them. Looks like things haven't gotten to the worst yet. The world behind the door reflected the door pusher's heart to a certain extent. The world was made from flesh and blood, but the residents retained the appearance of a living person. This kind of contrast caught Chen Ge's attention. Exploring the world behind the door was actually trying to understand the door pusher. This was a rare chance to get to know the door pusher. Chen Ge followed the girl and pushed open the door at the end of the corridor. He walked out from the central hub and arrived at the middle section of the underground morgue. The blood fog thickened, and the walls were replaced by organs. There were 3 rooms in the middle section, and each room had a cadaver pool. There was a letter of commitment on the door. To thank the cadavers for their selfless contribution and to give them enough respect, I, as a medical student, make a solemn promise to treat every class seriously and not take any pictures for entertainment purposes. The words on the letter are still wet. It looks like it was written recently. Chen Ge looked through the glass on the door. The cadaver pool was filled with reddish-brown liquid, but there was no dead body. The most important thing now is to find more people living behind the door. Only by breaking the blood membrane will I be able to communicate with the ghosts normally. Chen Ge did not enter the cadaver pool. He was about to leave the middle section when he heard a man's voice. It seemed to come from the autopsy room on the left. The value of life does not lie in the form but in what you do. When you stand next to the autopsy table, you can only see skin, fat, blood vessels, muscles, bones, and organs. Do you understand? Quote. Chen Ge walked toward the autopsy room. The door was half open, and he looked through the gap. A male lecturer in a white coat stood at the podium. His voice was deep and powerful, and he was teaching the 8 students in the room. The mask covered most of his face, and the male lecturer walked between the 2 groups of students. His eyes were bright and piercing. This is your first class here, so it's normal for you to be curious and disgusted, but don't let me see any of you purposely joking around. Every single cadaver is worthy of respect. In this room, all the deaths are for the sake of the living, Ji Yushenwei said with a smile. What you should focus on now is whether this nerve is clear or not, whether the blood vessels are separated cleanly, and remember the details of the connection and location of the muscles. Only the male lecturer was speaking inside the room. He was not that old, and he looked rather stern. Western Zhejiang Medical University had the largest underground morgue in Zhejiang. In the whole of Huazhong South, this was probably the only place where students could dissect a cadaver in groups of 4. Due to the lack of cadavers, most medical schools had groups of 8 or even 16. Chen Ge observed everything silently from outside the door. He looked at the tall male teacher inside the room and felt like he had seen him somewhere before. That pair of eyes feels very familiar. I think I've seen them outside morgue number 8 before. He thought about it for a long time before he remembered that there was a cadaver soaked in a glass container inside Morgue No. 8. The unique thing was that the cadaver's eyes were open. The cadaver soaked in formalin outside the door was given a new life inside the door. Is this a figment of Dr. Gao's imagination? Or did he trap the deceased soul inside the door? The membrane on the body thickened again. Just as Chen Ge was hesitating whether to enter the room or not, heavy breathing came from the other end of the corridor. A gust of wind mixed with a stench came from the other end of the corridor. Following the breathing, the organs on the wall started to pulsate rhythmically. What's coming? The monster coming from the other end of the corridor gave Chen Ge a completely different feeling from the girl in white and the male lecturer. It was filled with negative emotions like destruction, murder, and anger. The white cat scratched Chen Ge's shoulder. Its ears turned back, and it growled. It also felt threatened. Just as Chen Ge focused all his attention on the corridor, the door of the autopsy room next to him suddenly creaked open. Turning to look, Chen Ge saw the male lecturer with the mask standing next to the door, studying Chen Ge with confusion. Before Chen Ge could come up with an excuse, his arm was grabbed by the male teacher. Come in first. The male teacher pulled Chen Ge into the room and closed the door. You should hide first. Don't let it see you. The breathing in the corridor got closer. With the urging of the male teacher, Chen Ge grabbed the hammer and crawled under the second set of experiment tables. This was a table that could be raised and lowered, and it was originally used to store dead bodies. As he got closer, Chen Ge realized that the 8 tightly wrapped students in the room were actually corpses as well. Their heads were lowered, and their stiff fingers gripped the scalpel crookedly. No wonder they didn't say anything. This teacher is probably a lunatic. Chen Ge hesitated for a moment, then crawled under the test bench. The movement outside grew louder, and the heavy breathing slowly approached. Chen Ge sneaked a look through the gap under the table. The blood vessels in the corridor were pulsing, and soon, a humanoid monster with its face hollowed out walked out. Its body was larger than a normal person's. It was about 2.4 meters tall, and its head almost reached the ceiling. This person's body structure was different from the girls that Chen Ge had encountered. Like the surrounding walls, it was only covered by a layer of blood membrane, and Chen Ge could see the various organs inside. The monster moved very slowly. It seemed to have merged with the world behind the door, and it wandered aimlessly. The corridor shook, and when the monster passed the morgue, it paused. The hollowed-out face turned toward the door. Chen Ge could clearly feel the door lock shaking. After the monster realized that it could not open the door, it slowly walked away. After waiting for a few minutes, the corridor returned to normal, and Chen Ge crawled out from under the table. What was that thing that just passed by? The male teacher had been hiding behind the door. He did not answer Chen Ge's question but used a strange gaze to stare at Chen Ge. Moments later, he removed the mask. His facial features were identical to the human face soaked in formalin outside the door. That's the new security guard at the school. He has a bad temper. If he sees a student like you running around during class, he'll probably drag you to see the headmaster. Student. Headmaster. Chen Ge did not quite understand what the male teacher meant. The world in the man's eyes seemed to be different from his own, and what the male teacher said next confirmed that. Which class are you from? Who is your teacher? The male teacher realized that Chen Ge did not answer, but he was not angry. It's fine if you don't want to tell me, but it's not right to skip class. You'd better go back. I know that a child like you may have more thoughts in your mind and be more sensitive. Quote. A child like me. Do I look like a child to you? Chen Ge did not quite understand what the male teacher meant, but he could hear kindness in his tone. The man's tone was completely different from when he talked to his own students. It was as if he was afraid of hurting Chen Ge's pride. A broken body doesn't mean anything. A strong and courageous heart is the most important thing. The male teacher seemed to be consoling Chen Ge, and this confused Chen Ge even more. In your eyes, I'm broken. My mistake. I apologize for that. Please go back. This male teacher who was scolding his student earlier changed his tone. It was clear that he was not a bad person. Through the male teacher's various reactions, Chen Ge finally understood. In the male teacher's eyes, the world made from flesh and blood behind the door was normal, and for an outsider like Chen Ge, he would think it was weird. Chen Ge could not understand how the world looked in the male teacher's eyes. He just wanted to get more clues from the teacher. Sir, what is your name? My name is Lu Zhengyi. You can call me Mr. Lu. It's not right to skip class. If you have something on your mind and have no one to share it with, come find me. Mr. Lu was probably just being polite, but Chen Ge did not plan to miss this opportunity. He placed the hammer back into his backpack. His hands gripped the hem of his shirt, and after some hesitation, he said, Mr. Lu, actually, I've been a victim of school bullying. I've never dared to share these secrets with anyone. School bullying. Something like that happens at our school. Mr. Lu's expression turned serious, and his tone changed. Don't be afraid. Tell me all the people who have bullied you, and I'll take care of this until the end. Chen Ge did not expect things to go so smoothly. He merely wanted to make himself look pitiful so that he could get closer to Mr. Lu. Who knew Mr. Lu would be so direct, asking who had bullied him and preparing to help him. This is a good teacher. Chen Ge thought that Lu Zhengyi was a good person. The haunted house needs a manager who can control the mannequins, and he looks like the perfect candidate. Taking a light breath, Chen Ge did not answer Mr. Lu's question immediately. He lowered his voice. Sir, I know you're doing this for my own good, but I can't tell you. You're afraid that they'll continue to bully you in the future. Mr. Lu frowned. Then have you considered that the more you don't resist, the more they'll think you're weak, and that will form a vicious cycle. Chen Ge lowered his head like he was seriously considering Mr. Lu's words. Don't be afraid, I'll help you settle this. Mr. Lu was confident, and that was what he planned to do. After a while, Chen Ge seemed to have made up his mind. He slowly raised his head. Mr. Lu, my case will involve many people. When the time comes, you'll realize that some of the students and even colleagues around you are hiding a side that you don't know about. You're a good person, so I don't want to drag you into this. Quote. Involve many people. I've met most of the people at this school, and they probably wouldn't do something like that. Mr. Lu had a strong sense of justice, but he was not stupid. He thought about it in his mind. Other than the headmaster, there are 6 other teachers at this school, including myself. Some of them are doctors with rich clinical experience. Based on my understanding of them, they wouldn't do something like bullying students. Chen Ge lowered his head and silently memorized everything that Mr. Lu said. Excluding the teachers, that leaves the students, security, and support staff. Mr. Lu could not guess who it was, but he could see that Chen Ge did not look like he was lying. Teacher, those people look the same in front of you, but they look the same in front of me. They are simply animals in human skin. When Chen Ge spoke, he gritted his teeth and clenched his fists so hard that his veins popped out. Seeing Chen Ge like this, Teacher Lu felt that Chen Ge had been wronged. I can't drag you down with me, but if there's a chance, I'll personally unveil the true colors of those people. Chen Ge wasn't just saying that casually. He felt endless malice from the security guard just now. The security guard who had been assimilated by the blood world was not interested in Mr. Lu, but if he saw Chen Ge, he would definitely attack him crazily. Then, Mr. Lu would naturally be able to see the true faces of those people. Alright. Mr. Lu did not force Chen Ge to continue. He walked to the 2 groups of corpses and started the class again. Chen Ge was bored standing by the side. The longer he stayed, the thicker the blood film on his skin would become. Mr. Lu is a good person. I can use this chance to test my hypothesis. I'll see if I can gain the approval of the world behind the door by helping the souls behind the door. He walked toward Mr. Lu, but before he got close, he was stopped by Mr. Lu. Don't get close to the autopsy table without wearing the lab coat. Teacher, I just want to ask if there's anything I can help you with. Forget it. If you can learn what I'm teaching and help more people in the future, I'll be satisfied. Mr. Lu looked at Chen Ge and shook his head. There are lab coats in the sterilizer. Go and change into them. You'll be sitting in for this class. After class, I'll go with you to ask your teacher about the situation. Okay. Chen Ge changed into the lab coat and put on a thick mask. He walked to the table and stood with the 4 dead students. He looked at the cadavers on the table. Before Chen Ge came in, there was actually only Lu Zhengyi in the room. The others were all dead bodies. Thinking about it that way, it was quite scary. Lu Zhengyi lectured to the dead bodies and would occasionally gesture at them. There was a textbook on the table, and most of the terms Chen Ge did not understand. He flipped to the page with pictures, and he understood about 30 to 40% of it. After lecturing for a long time, the cadavers on the table and the students next to them were still dead bodies. Naturally, they would not touch the bodies. However, Mr. Lu did not seem to notice any of this. In contrast, Chen Ge understood it more and more. When he completed his first nightmare mission, he had been rewarded with the talent skill mortician's makeup. A good mortician would be proficient in the study of human anatomy and death. Chen Ge took the scalpel from the student next to him and adjusted his breathing. Only practice could prove that he had learned what Mr. Lu had taught him. The first step of autopsy was to separate the skin from the whole body. Chen Ge's hand that held the scalpel was steady. Initially, Mr. Lu wanted to remind Chen Ge, but when Chen Ge finished separating the skin from the cadaver's back, he closed his mouth and stood to the side quietly. The scalpel slid across the neck, entering from below the occipital bone. The blade sliced through the scalp and cut through the hair. When the sound of hair being cut echoed in the room, Chen Ge's heart started to race. This was the first time he had been so close to a dead body, and it was done in such a way. Soaked in formalin for a long time, the cadaver's skin was hard like cowhide. There was no sign of life. This was the first time that Chen Ge had felt death so clearly, and he would remember this feeling for the rest of his life. After death, all the desires will turn into regrets. My haunted house should be a place to store these regrets. As the autopsy continued, Chen Ge realized that the blood membrane covering his body was thinning, and his breathing became smoother. Mr. Lu would occasionally correct Chen Ge's mistakes. Initially, Chen Ge's movements were irregular, and he made many mistakes, but his hands were steady, and he learned very quickly. This surprised Mr. Lu. The autopsy only completed the first part. When Chen Ge prepared to continue, he realized that the blood membrane on his body suddenly stopped thinning. What's going on? Chen Ge put down the scalpel. He had planned to remove the blood membrane in this room. Lifting his head, Mr. Lu, who stood not far away from him, had lost the light in his eyes. The ground under his feet was made of flesh, and blood vessels crawled into his legs. Blood flowed under his skin, and slowly, Teacher Lu's eyes turned bloodshot. His body had lost control, and he seemed to have transformed into a different person. He moved his body slowly and lifted the cadaver from the table next to him. He helped it put on the lab coat and then placed the cadaver of the student next to him on the autopsy table. After that, he turned to look at the table that Chen Ge was on. His blood-red eyes scanned the few of them. He seemed to be thinking, why was there one more person? The blood membrane was still there, and Chen Ge could not use the ghosts on him. His backpack had been placed under the lab table when he was changing, so he could not take out the hammer immediately. Wearing the lab coat and a thick mask, Chen Ge stood among the dead bodies. His hands stopped moving, and time seemed to have stopped. Mr. Lu, whose legs were entangled by blood vessels and whose eyes were bloodshot, circled around Chen Ge and his students. His body reeked of blood, and the controlled Mr. Lu had lost his rationality. He could not make a choice. It felt like his brain was about to explode, and the pain was unbearable. Pulling on his hair, Mr. Lu pummeled his body. The protruding organs on the wall pulsed due to the change in his emotions. Heavy breathing came from the corridor again, and the monster with the face hollowed out slowly walked over. It was large, and its skin was almost transparent. Blood vessels covered the surface of its body. The corridor shook, and Mr. Lu slowly calmed down. He glanced outside, and without hesitation, he grabbed one of the students and dragged him out. Blood flowed silently. Through the window, Chen Ge saw the monster with the face hollowed out have a large hole in its stomach, and it shoved the student's body into it. The monster seemed to be enjoying this, and moments later, its body grew larger. After the students disappeared, the monster did not leave. Its hollowed-out face faced the window like it was not satisfied and wanted to eat more. The classroom door was closed by Mr. Lu, and he did not step out of the classroom. After dealing with the student, he returned to the lab table. He picked up the dead body on the table and helped it change into the lab coat. Then he placed the body of the student next to Chen Ge on the table. Everyone's position was the same as when Chen Ge first entered the classroom, but this time, he had taken the place of one of the students. The blood vessels on Mr. Lu's legs slowly dissipated, and the redness in his eyes faded. When the organs on the wall stopped beating, the last trace of blood at the bottom of Mr. Lu's eyes disappeared. He clutched his chest and lay on the ground, gasping for air like a drowning man who had just been fished out of the river. Chen Ge quickly walked over and helped Teacher Lu up. His face was pale, and his body seemed to become more transparent. Are you okay? It's an old problem. Lu Zhengyi stood up, as if he had forgotten everything that had happened before. He directly regarded Chen Ge as his own student. All right, let's continue with the lesson. He started to repeat what he had just said, teaching passionately in a room full of corpses and with only himself. Chen Ge tried asking Teacher Lu if he needed any help. Mr. Lu's answer was the same as before, but this time, when Chen Ge followed Mr. Lu's instructions to dissect the body, the blood membrane on his body did not thin. This blood-colored world was very special. It was like a huge deformed life form that had its own consciousness. It seemed to be able to repair the holes on its own. If I stay here for too long, I might be noticed by them. There was a sense of urgency in Chen Ge's heart. He had to quickly solve the problem of the blood membrane before he was discovered. Putting down the scalpel, Chen Ge called out to Lu Zhengyi, "Teacher, I need to go to the toilet. Come back as soon as possible." Mr. Lu was communicating with the dead students, so he did not pay attention to Chen Ge. When Chen Ge walked past him, he seemed to be reminded of something, and he looked at Chen Ge with confusion. "Student, didn't you tell me something earlier? I seem to remember that I promised you something." Quote. "Sir, remember this face of mine. We'll meet again soon." Chen Ge put on the lab coat, carried the white cat out from his backpack, and left the room. There was no blood stain in the corridor. If not for the fact that he had seen it with his own eyes, Chen Ge would not have believed that a murder had happened there just a few minutes ago. Lu Zhengyi accidentally revealed a piece of information to me. There are 5 types of people in the underground morgue: the headmaster, the teachers, the students, the security, and the support staff. The blood world has changed Lu Zhengyi's worldview. In his eyes, everything is reasonable, so what are these 5 types of people in his eyes? Lu Zhengyi himself is the representative of the teachers. He has the memory and excellent professional skills. He retains the appearance of a living person and even his personality when he was alive. The students should represent the dead bodies. They don't know how to talk or fight back. This type is probably the most common in the world behind the door. I've seen the security guards. They look more like monsters made from different dead bodies. They are completely controlled by this blood world to maintain order. The support staff is probably the victims of the Society of Strange Tales. If their lingering spirits remain in the world after they die, they might be sent by Dr. Gao to the world behind the door to become the world's nutrients. The last headmaster should be Dr. Gao himself. He represents the consciousness of this blood world. The 5 types of people formed this twisted world. It was impossible for Chen Ge to deal with all of them on his own. Isn't this 3-star scenario a bit too crazy? Different from Chen Ge's caution, the usually timid white cat ran ahead on its own, and its eyes were shining. It feels like the cat has grown bigger again. Taking out the hammer, Chen Ge followed closely behind the white cat. They exited the middle section of the underground morgue and came to the outer section, which was the largest. Don't run yet. Chen Ge grabbed the white cat and placed it on his backpack. He stopped at the side of the corridor and looked in. There was a sealed door between the middle section and the outer section of the underground morgue, and there was a number 8 written on the door. Morgue number 8, which isn't recorded in the school's files, really exists behind the door. Looks like there is such a morgue in real life, but it has been sealed up by someone with ill intentions. Quote. Chen Ge pulled on the blood-stained chain on the door and stared at the lock for a long time. The structure of this lock is completely different from the ones I've seen before. It will be difficult to break it open. Even though Chen Ge was curious about the secret behind the door, the blood membrane had not been completely broken. If he was too rash, he would be in a disadvantageous position. I'll endure it. After I can communicate with the ghosts, I'll bring my employees over. The more the enemy wants to hide, the more important it will be to me. Quote. After memorizing the location of Morgue No. 8, Chen Ge did not stay there for long and continued down the corridor. In the passageway made of flesh and blood, organs pulsed on the walls. Blood vessels stretched across the ceiling, and countless blood vessels surged within them. Compared to when Chen Ge first entered, the world behind the door started to change like a person slowly waking up from a deep sleep. Walking down the corridor, Chen Ge could hear the conversation of two people coming from Morgue 7. I hear the experiment has failed again. Yes, they're all dead. No one can escape from that room. This is so scary. I hope it won't be my turn. Quote. In your dreams. I reckon that the next batch will be the two of us. Have you noticed that there have been very few newcomers recently? Yes, that's probably why the experiment has been intensified. Something has happened outside. Actually, I quite sympathize with the dead body. He was loved by a madman, and he's going to be tortured in death. Shut up, this is not something we can discuss. Focus on your work. Chen Ge stood at the door and glanced inside. It was two monsters talking inside the room. They had the shape of a human, and their faces looked like a normal person's. However, their bodies were stuck together like mud, and it was the blood vessels that kept them together. His eyes scanned the faces of the two monsters, and Chen Ge was quite surprised. Even though their bodies were pieced together, their faces were their own. Chen Ge had seen their pictures in the room filled with pictures outside the door. Both of them were victims of the Society of Strange Tales, and one of them was Patient 41's father, the middle-aged man who had abused his own child. Chen Ge did not hurry to enter Morgue 7. His brain was spinning, and everything that he saw matched his speculation. These two should be the logisticians that Lu Zhengyi mentioned. They were formed from the lingering spirits of the victims of the Society of Strange Tales, and they worked directly for the headmaster. Accomplice. This term appeared in Chen Ge's mind. From how he saw it, the Society of Strange Tales was an organization with no bottom line. After people died, they would take away the lingering spirits of their victims and force them to work for them. Just you wait, I will save all of you. Chen Ge gripped the hammer tightly and squatted at the corner of the corridor. He used his yin-yang vision to look at Morgue No. 7. The two monsters pulled back the bloody cloth on the ground to reveal a number of corpses. They looked like they had been brought in from the outside world. They lifted the body and placed it on the cart, facing the door of the morgue. I'm ready. Open the cupboard. One of the monsters nervously stood beside the morgue cabinet. He took a deep breath and reached out his hand that was covered in stitches to open the cabinet's lock. The moment the spring of the lock moved, the thick door of the morgue was smashed open, and countless thick blood vessels extended out like pythons. The other monster was very experienced. He moved the cabinet door and immediately pushed the car forward. When the blood vessel reached out, it pushed the body on the car right in front of it. The blood vessels wrapped around the corpse like the tentacles of an octopus and dragged it deeper into the morgue. Hurry up and close the cabinet door. The two monsters worked together to close the cabinet door, but there was an accident when they locked it. A blood vessel crawled out through the gap and wrapped around one of the monster's arm. The tip of the blood vessel appeared to have a mouth filled with sharp teeth, and it snapped the monster's arm. The door kept being slammed, and it felt like there were multiple beasts trapped inside the cabinet. The monster did not scream in pain when its arm was taken away like it was used to it. While the blood vessel retreated, it closed the lock. 10 seconds later, the morgue quieted down, and the two monsters prepared to open the second morgue. They only sighed in relief after all the dead bodies were sent into the morgue. By then, they were covered in wounds, and many parts of their bodies were missing. Finally, it's done. The two monsters pushed the cart away from morgue number 7, and Chen Ge silently followed behind them. They put the dead bodies outside the door into the morgue for the blood vessels to absorb. Is this to provide the blood world with nutrition? Chen Ge looked at the thick blood vessels on the ceiling and the blood vessels that flowed quietly inside them, and he felt that this world was even weirder. The Society of Strange Tales discovered the existence of the door 5 years earlier than I did. They seem to have mastered the method to modify the door. When Chen Ge passed morgue number 7, he glanced inside. It did not feel like a blood school but more like a blood factory. For some reason, I feel like Dr. Gao is a monster scarier than the door. This man is too crazy. I have no idea what he's thinking. Several meters later, there were two doctors in white coats arguing at the door of morgue No. 6. They used many terms related to the human body, and in any case, Chen Ge did not understand a single word. The doctors seemed to have a very high status in this blood world. The two logisticians did not dare get close to them, like getting close to them was a form of disrespect. After the doctor finished arguing and left, the two monsters finally dared to say a few words to vent their dissatisfaction. Looks like the experiment has failed again. The room has swallowed more than 100 people. Actually, it's not a failure. Didn't the body move a long time ago? What do you know? The body is alive, but the soul has already dissipated. The madman is trying to find his wife's soul. When the soul and the body are combined, they can barely be considered a person. Quote. I don't understand. In any case, it has nothing to do with me. Let's move faster. We're at the old man's place. If we run into him, something bad will happen. Quote. I would have forgotten about it if you didn't remind me. The two monsters shut their mouths. When they passed morgue number 4, they slowed down, afraid that they would make any noise. However, to their surprise, there was an old man standing behind the door of morgue no. 4. When he saw them, he opened the door. Stand there. The old man's voice was stern and stern. It was scary to hear. Dr. Wei, you're looking for us. The two monsters squeezed together, not daring to get close. Answer a question for me. The old man had a pair of eagle eyes, and his gaze was sharp. The monsters did not dare resist the old man's gaze. They nodded unwillingly. What do you want to ask? His lips moved, and the old man asked with confusion, am I dead or not? Once the question left his lips, the blood vessels in the corridor started to beat faster, and the organs on the wall pulsed even harder. Aren't you alive and well? The two monsters forced a smile. But I remember clearly that I'm dead. The old man's brows creased together, and he started to think. One of the monsters silently tugged at the other, and the two slowly retreated into the corridor and jogged away. The door opened, and the old man stood at the door. There was confusion in his eyes. I'm not dead. Chen Ge had seen this expressionless old man before. It was also inside morgue number 8. At the time, the old man's body had been next to Lu Zhengyi. When he was soaked in formalin, he looked very peaceful, completely different from how he was now. Looks like everyone who is displayed in morgue number 8 still retains their memory and personality. They are not affected by the blood world. The world behind the door was filled with various negative emotions. Staying there for a long time would slowly affect one, and only the purest would be able to survive. The Lu Zhengyi that Chen Ge had met earlier was one such example. When he heard that his student was being bullied, he immediately stood up for his student. The old man before Chen Ge was the same. Combined with what had happened to Lu Zhengyi, Chen Ge understood something. Perhaps it is because the blood-red world cannot assimilate them, so it forcibly manipulates them to make them forget certain things to maintain the stability of this place. Chen Ge was a very calm person, and another question soon appeared in his mind. Compared to forcibly controlling their thoughts, killing them is obviously easier, but the blood world didn't do that. The world behind the door has no sympathy or pity, and they are still alive. This means that they are useful to the world behind the door. The monsters call the old man a doctor. Be it Lu Zhengyi or this old man, they should be the best doctors in their field. The owner of the door seems to want to resurrect someone. The reason he kept these two doctors alive is probably to help him complete the experiment to resurrect the dead. Through the monsters, conversation and the clues that he had, Chen Ge came to a conclusion. The two monsters are afraid of trouble and don't want to interact with the old man, but it's different for me. Chen Ge placed the white cat inside his backpack, put away the hammer, and walked out from the corner. Hearing the footsteps, the old man slowly raised his head. When he saw Chen Ge, he was surprised. It felt like he had been given a fright out of the blue. I'm curious, what do I look like in their eyes? Chen Ge politely walked to the old man's side and said, Sir, I have something to say to you. Can I have a few minutes of your time? It should be class time now. Which class are you from? The old man looked at Chen Ge a few times. He seemed to be slowly getting used to it, and his expression returned to normal. Old man, I heard the conversation between you and those two people. Chen Ge went straight to the point. He didn't want to waste any more time. So what if they heard? You also think I'm crazy? The old man grabbed the door and prepared to retreat. You're not crazy. Actually, you're already dead. After Chen Ge said that, the whole corridor became quiet. He could clearly hear the sound of blood flowing through the ceiling. The old man took a deep look at Chen Ge. Without saying anything, he nodded slightly and stepped aside. After getting the old man's permission, Chen Ge flashed into morgue no. 4. This was a small morgue. Due to wiring issues, morgue number 4 had been closed, and it had been converted into a sample room. Bang! The door slammed shut, and the old man still did not say anything. He walked to the racks that were filled with different organ specimens. Chen Ge had no idea what the old man was doing, so he followed behind him quietly. The old man led him to the innermost part of the racks. If you have something to say it here. People outside can't see us. Chen Ge nodded and said, Sir, can you describe how I look in your eyes? Your facial features are not where they should be. It's quite a miracle that you're still alive. The old man did not mince his words. Then what do the surrounding walls and racks look like in your eyes? Walls. The old man heard the meaning behind Chen Ge's words. They're painted white, freshly renovated, and they're very clean. Then do you know what this wall looks like to me? Chen Ge pointed at the wall next to him. It's covered in a transparent blood membrane, and it's covered with blood vessels of different sizes. They're like human organs, and they keep beating. After saying that, Chen Ge pointed at his own face. What I see is the real world. I believe you've realized that already. The purer a person was when they were alive, the harder they would be to control in the world behind the door after death. The old man belonged to this category. He was not only unaffected by the negative emotions of the blood world, he had slowly noticed some things in the battle with the blood world. I know you might not be able to accept this sudden revelation, but it's the truth. Chen Ge had been paying attention to the old man. Once he sensed something was wrong, he would do something. I once saw you in morgue number 8. Your body was soaked in formalin, and you looked peaceful. You're saying that not only am I dead, I've also donated my body to the school. The old man tried to think, and he remembered something, but at that moment, something strange happened. Multiple blood vessels rushed toward the old man from the wall and the ground. Something similar had happened to Chen Ge before. This time, he was prepared. When the blood vessels appeared, he took out the hammer and smashed all the blood vessels that approached him. But then, more blood vessels rushed out from the wall and the ground. They were so thick that it was scary. Sir, think about the decision you've made. Everything you're seeing is fake. Quote. He protected the old man and smashed the blood vessels that approached him, but that only bought him a few seconds. Heavy breathing came from the corridor outside the door, and the security was attracted. What decision have I made? There was clarity in the old man's eyes, but then the blood vessels curled around the old man's body from behind. His eyes flickered between red and black. The old man's expression was one of extreme pain. Just as he was about to reach his limit, his body seemed to have been trained to do this on instinct. When he felt the extreme pain, he put his hand into his sleeve. In the end, the old man was unable to escape. After the blood vessels disappeared, he collapsed weakly to the ground. Sir. Chen Ge squatted down to help the old man up. Can you still remember who I am? With his hand over his heart, the old man stood up from the ground. He looked at Chen Ge and shook his head. Then, he seemed to remember something, and he pulled back his sleeves. On his thin arms, there were many wounds that had been gouged out by nails. He looked at the newest wound and thought to himself, when did this new wound appear? Chen Ge did not expect the old man to record things like this. The fact that the man could do something like this when the blood vessels were crawling up his body and he was in extreme pain proved that the man's willpower was very strong. Sir, you dug this wound yourself. You can compare it to your own fingernails. I saw with my own eyes that you used your other hand's index and middle finger to dig it out. Quote. I dug it out myself. How come I have no memory of that? Quote. When they conversed, heavy breathing came from the corridor. The monster with the hollowed-out face was approaching. The scary face was stuck to the window of Morgue 4. Its vision was blocked by the racks filled with specimens. After it could not see what was inside the room, it seemed to be preparing to enter. The door shook. The monster was very strong. Stay here and don't move. The old man pulled back his sleeves and walked out from behind the racks. He walked to the door and opened it. The giant monster poked its head into the room. It had no face, and the inside of its skull was clean. It had no idea how it sensed the outside world. Who let you in? The old man asked sternly. In terms of height and size, he was only half the monster, but in terms of presence, they were not on the same level. The old man's eyes were sharp. After he realized the monster did not leave, he raised his arm to block the monster. This is not a place you should be. Get out. Hiding behind the racks, Chen Ge also thought this was quite unbelievable. The power difference between them was too big, but the atmosphere was completely opposite. The world in the old man's eyes is different from mine. Perhaps in his eyes, this is just a normal person with bad intentions. The monster was blocked by the old man at the door. It seemed to sense Chen Ge. A gap opened on its stomach, and its large palm pulled out a bloody rope from behind it. The smell of blood and stench spread out. The monster bared its fangs, but the old man did not retreat. Instead, he took another step forward. He yelled at the monster, and his voice grew louder. The two were locked in a stalemate at the door. The monster's stomach cracked open, and it groaned like it was gasping for air. It was extremely angry, but there was nothing it could do. In the end, it left unwillingly. After the monster disappeared at the end of the corridor, the old man closed the door and returned to the rack. He pulled the shirt off his arm. Let's continue our earlier conversation. You saw me scratch myself with your own eyes, but how come I have no memory of it at all? Grandpa, don't you have any memory of wounds, blood vessels, or death? I think I've been having the same nightmare lately. When I close my eyes, many blood vessels will wrap around my body. I struggle with all my might, but I'm still dragged into the darkness by the blood vessels. After that, I wake up. The old man touched the wound on his arm. I don't remember when I got these wounds. Chen Ge told the old man everything that had just happened, but halfway through, the organs on the wall started to jump crazily, and heavy breathing came from the corridor outside. Chen Ge had no choice but to give up. Let's wait a little longer. Right now, we don't have the strength to protect ourselves. There's no point in telling you. Chen Ge understood now. Once the old man remembered something important, the blood world behind the door would forcibly take control of him, and the monsters that had been wandering the corridor would come. This time, he had managed to fool the old man, but Chen Ge did not think he would be so lucky next time. Compared to making the old man remember everything, breaking the blood membrane was more important. Grandpa, is there anything else that you need my help with? Chen Ge suddenly asked. The old man was confused. He thought for a long time, and his eyes focused on Chen Ge. I want you to take me to morgue number 8. Morgue number 8. Chen Ge did not expect the old man to make such a request. The morgue has been sealed up, why do you want to go there? I don't know, but I have a feeling something very important to me is locked up there. Perhaps I've been there before and left something there. Do I have to enter morgue number 8? Unlocking the lock required time, and the process of opening the door might attract more than one monster. When that happened, he would be in danger. Yes. The old man nodded. He was a stubborn man, and he only needed Chen Ge's help. Entering morgue number 8 was dangerous, but Chen Ge could not find any other people in such a short period of time. He felt like the blood world had started to notice him, and if he delayed any longer, things might get worse for him. Staying inside the blood fog of the world behind the door, the membrane on the surface of the skin will continue to thicken. There are 2 other unlucky people in the room at the central hub. If I waste too much time here, they will probably suffocate to death. Chen Ge finally nodded. Okay, I'll take you to morgue number 8. After getting the confirmation from Chen Ge, the old man's expression softened. His eyes that looked at Chen Ge had an additional trace of admiration. He did not know why, but he felt like the young man was very pleasing to his eyes. Actually, the old man had this impression because Chen Ge was an outsider. He was different from the monsters behind the door, and the old man sensed a rare trace of humanity in him. If it was Li Shu or Ma Wei, the old man might have felt closer to them. The key to morgue number 8 should be in the headmaster's office, so it'll be difficult to get there. I know one way to get there, and the closest one has more security, but there's no need to go through so much trouble. You don't have to use the key to open the door. Chen Ge felt like he just wanted to break the membrane and fulfill the old man's wish. He did not want to go through so much trouble. Just follow me to morgue number 8. Chen Ge walked to the door, and the old man reminded him worriedly, whenever I leave this room, there's a very bad feeling in my heart. I don't know why, but you'd better be careful. Other than that, we mustn't be seen by anyone else. Quote. The old man seemed to have experience of sneaking away before, but he could not remember what had happened. It was just a blurry impression. Don't worry, I'm here. There was only a thin layer of membrane left on Chen Ge's body. After completing the old man's wish, he should be able to gain full recognition, and then he would not need to hide anymore. Opening the door, Chen Ge walked out from the room. When he walked out, nothing had changed in the corridor. However, when the old man stepped out from the door, the whole corridor shook, and the organs on the wall started to contract faster. Don't waste time, just go. Hurry. Quote. The layout of the underground morgue was complicated, and it was connected to many buildings. Chen Ge was thankful that he had memorized the map on his phone before he came in. Holding the hammer, Chen Ge walked toward morgue number 8 with familiarity. The old man followed behind him with determination in his eyes. After the old man left the room, the blood world started to change. If earlier was the calm before the storm, now the storm was coming. There was no turning back, and there was no other choice. Chen Ge led the old man down the corridor. He had already made preparations. No matter who stood in his way, he was going to rush over. A monster floated out from the wall, and the blood in the blood vessels above his head increased again. The morgues on both sides of the morgue started to creak like the anaconda blood vessels were hungry again. After a few turns, Chen Ge heard footsteps coming from ahead. He gripped the hammer tightly, and he did not slow down. If anything, he ran faster and faster. The people on the other side of the corridor seemed to hear his footsteps as well, but they were more cowardly and stopped immediately. Turning the corner, Chen Ge saw two logisticians that looked like mud repairing the corridor. They were pushing a cart, and the cart was filled with broken bodies. They patiently placed the bodies into the cracks in the wall and then used blood vessels to close the wall. The two monsters were working seriously. When they saw Chen Ge, they did not think much of him until they saw the old man, and they looked like they had seen a ghost. We've been discovered. Chen Ge raised the hammer and prepared to kill them, but he was stopped by the old man. Ignore them. These people are very cowardly. If you hurt them, the security will come immediately, but if you ignore them, they won't have the courage to report you. The old man stared at the two monsters. The two monsters turned around and continued to work like they could not see Chen Ge and the old man. I've interacted with them a lot, so I know them better. Chen Ge had already noticed that the monsters were afraid of the old man. It seems like you're quite a ruthless person. Not really. Let's go to morgue number 8 first, and we'll talk there. The atmosphere in the corridor became more oppressive. The organs on the wall started to bleed, and the situation was not looking good. After a few turns, Chen Ge and the old man used several minutes to reach morgue number 8. By then, the walls, the ground, and the blood vessels above them had started to bleed, and the blood fog thickened. The door is locked. How do we open it without the key? The old man stood in the fog. Ever since he left the room, his head had been aching like something was trying to break through some kind of limitation. Leave it to me. There was no turning back now. Chen Ge stared at the lock on the door and raised the hammer high. Bang! The door shook, and the organs on the wall started to bleed. It sure is sturdy. Chen Ge gritted his teeth and swung the hammer. He aimed at the spot where the door was connected to the wall. He had planned to smash the door from the very beginning. He had the impulse to do so the first time he passed by. Actually, even if the door was sturdy, Chen Ge was not afraid. At most, he would just smash the wall. No matter what, he would find a way in. As Chen Ge continued to swing the hammer, blood vessels crawled out from the grooves, making the hammer look even scarier. After more than 10 swings, Chen Ge realized that the blood vessels were not just for decoration, they seemed to have some other special effect. It seemed like it was because of the blood vessels that the hammer could cause so much damage to the items in the blood world behind the door. Chen Ge himself had lost track of how many times he had swung the door. The commotion was too loud, and this was different from the old man's plan. He had wanted Chen Ge to steal the key and then sneak over to open the door to find the thing that was important to him. However, Chen Ge's way of doing things was completely out of the ordinary. Perhaps even the headmaster, hiding deep inside the underground morgue, did not expect someone to be so crazy. The door shook, and the chains rattled. The lock had loosened, and the scariest thing was that the wall next to the lock was almost smashed through by Chen Ge. Panting came from both ends of the corridor again. The security was coming. Is it done? The old man's heart skipped a beat. The admiration he had for Chen Ge earlier had turned into a strange emotion. Now, Chen Ge gritted his teeth and took several steps back. Using the strength in his body, he swung the hammer. Bang! The door of morgue number 8 slammed heavily into the wall, and the hammer did not slow down. It hit the edge of the wall and chipped off a large piece of organ. The locked door was smashed open by Chen Ge, and then the security, who had their faces hollowed out, ran over. They were large in size and made from multiple carcasses. They carried hatred and pain. Their stomachs were cracked, and their arms kept reaching out. Quick, come in. Chen Ge and the old man entered morgue number 8. The old man's wish had been fulfilled, and the blood membrane on Chen Ge's body was slowly thinning. He closed the door and used his back to block the door with the hammer. Hopefully, I can hold this off until the membrane disappears. Chen Ge did not pay much attention to this morgue number 8, but when he lifted his head to look, he was stunned. The structure of morgue number 8 inside the door was slightly different from the real world. Morgue number 8 inside the door had a special container made of flesh and blood, and inside it was a man around 40 in a white coat. Dr. Chen. The man inside the container was Dr. Chen from Western Zhejiang's children's home. At the last moment of the trial mission at Coffin Village, it was he who chased away number 10 from the Society of Strange Tales. Why is he here? Could it be that he was defeated in the fight? Quote. When Chen Ge was thinking, the door behind him was slammed heavily, and arms covered in blood reached into the room through the gap. The two monsters who had their faces hollowed out had arrived. Sir, have you found the thing that you've lost? I can't hold on any longer. There was still a thin layer of blood membrane on Chen Ge's arm, and he could not remove it no matter what. He was already calling out the ghost's name, but there was no response. Don't panic. The old man walked past the empty containers before stopping before the one that contained his body in real life. His palm pressed against the glass, and his eyes turned to the introduction before the container. Wei Jukan, a professor at Western Zhejiang Medical University. When he was alive, he founded Western Zhejiang's Life Sciences Research Institute. When he was 73, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. In his will, he donated his body for medical education. He looked at the words on the container, and many memories exploded in his mind. It was about his life, his research, and finally, it stopped when his body was about to collapse. In the sick room, he planned to donate his body to the school. At the time, his children had stopped him, and in his weakened state, he had held the pen and said his last words. I'd rather they cut me 1,000,000 times than make one mistake on a patient.